I wanted to make a video to help with motor alignment because I know sometimes it can be a bit confusing. And I'm basing this motor alignment on the best instructions that you can find. These are the most recent motor alignment instructions, and I'm going to show you, hopefully this will show up, the website where you can directly get to these instructions online if you do need to realign your motors. Realigning your motors is necessary if you're getting a lot of obstruction notices. If something's come loose, a lot of times some vibration over time can loosen some of these bolts up a little bit. But a sign that you may need to realign your motors is if you're getting obstructions, or if you're getting drift in your pattern, or if the drift test shows that one of the motors is off. So realigning your motors is done with your motor brackets, and as you can see in the picture here, there are 4 bolts. Even if your motor bracket looks different than this, it will still have 4 bolts, and there are 2 silver and 2 black. And let's go to this paragraph here that says the color of the bolts shows whether tightening them causes the motor to be raised or lowered. So the silver bolts will raise the motor when they are tightened. The black bolts will lower the motor when tightened. So that's important to remember. Also, the location of the screws determines the direction of tilt for the motor. The inner bolts are used to tilt the motor up and down, and the outer bolts are used to tilt the motor side to side. All of these bolts are interrelated. So let's actually take a look at a bracket here. I have a bracket and it's mounted to your machine, but let's look underneath here. You can see all of the bolts are related because they all are attached here. So when you push on these silver bolts, if you loosen or tighten the silver bolts, it is going to affect all the other bolts. So my suggestion when making adjustments is, first of all, to use quarter turns. And we're going to use a hex head to adjust these screws. But you just want to loosen or tighten a quarter turn on one bolt, and then check all of the other bolts for tightness. And you want them to be tight but not overly tightened. So as soon as you adjust one bolt, go and adjust all of the other bolts as necessary as well. And that's going to give you the best results. It's going to be slow, but it will make sure that everything is adjusted properly. So also when making any adjustments, you'll see the 2 screws here that attach your bracket. You always want to make sure that those are tight but not overly tight as well. So if you're working with the motor and you're making adjustments, raising and lowering, it shouldn't affect those 2 attachment bolts, and you shouldn't have to loosen those at all, really, but do check that they are tight if you're having any problems with the motor. You'll also see that there's a little slider here, and each bracket does have a slider. This different one, you'll see the slider here. That's if you need to move the motors forward or backward on your track at all. So that would be loosening those and then sliding forward or back. Remember, you always want the sensor wheel and the drive wheel. Sensor wheel here in the front looks a little bit different than the newer ones, but same thing. And then the drive wheel further back. You always want those to be riding in the center of the track. If they are not, then you need to adjust on that slider a little bit. One other thing when making adjustments, if you do have a limiting screw over top your sensor wheel, that would be this guy here. You can see when I push on the sensor wheel, he comes up. You always want to make sure that that limiting screw is raised about about 1/10 of an inch above the block. So measure from the block here, the top of the block, to the top of the screw. You always want to make sure that that's raised about 1/10 of an inch above the block when you are in manual mode. That means that your sensor wheel is getting the proper amount of pressure to read correctly. If it does not have that pressure, then you won't be able to calibrate properly. If you're moving the machine, the screen may show that the crosshair's not moving the way that you're moving the machine. So always make sure that limiting screw above the sensor wheel is raised about 1/10 of an inch above the block when in manual mode. Also, to figure out if you've aligned properly when in manual mode, your drive wheel, which is this guy right here, your drive wheel should be about a credit card thickness above the track when you are in manual mode. And you can just stick a credit card underneath there and see if it will slide underneath that guy, but you don't want it any higher than a credit card thickness.